Till now, we have mentioned how important it is in Python to be aware of indentation. So when we create a function like this, every line that comes after this definition over here that is indented is going to be inside this function. So by indented, I mean it's shifted by 4 spaces like this. So if you imagine each dot as a space, then this is a single block of code. And if you want to continue adding lines of code inside my first function, then we will continue adding lines of code which are indented over here. So here again, you see that this second print statement over here are indented with 4 spaces. Now if my code was written like this on the other hand, then the block of code is in fact only this part. And this print statement will not trigger when this function gets triggered because it is independent from this function and it's not indented inside this function over here. So here the block of code will be only this part. So when we call my first function over here, it's going to print out only hello world. So this part of code will not be printed out. Now a simple way that I like to think about this kind of indentation is kind of the file structure that you see when you go into Finder on your Mac or when you go to Explorer on Windows. Now if you have a function, we can think of this function as a folder over here. So our function name was my first function, and here I have created my first function like this. Anything that goes into this folder, for example, if I take this file from here and throw it inside this folder, you will notice that this file gets indented. And this way, it shows clearly that these two files, print hello world and print cu, are living inside this my first function folder over here. And this is equivalent of this code where we have a function name as a folder, and inside this function we have two files over here. The first one is print hello world and the second one print cu. So the code of block in this case will be whole function over here. On the other hand, if I take this print hello world file outside of this folder over here, you will see that it's not indented anymore. So this shows that this part of code is out of this folder over here. So it's applicable for this file also. If I take it out, it's going to be outside of this folder. So for simplicity, I'm just going to put one of them inside this folder, and this second file, which is printing cu, will be outside of folder over here. Now in Python, the equivalent of this will be like this. So as you can see here, this second print statement, which is printing cu, is not indented anymore. So this means that it's outside of my first function folder over here. So it's not inside of my first function over here. So as I mentioned before, the code block in this case will be like this. So this second print statement is not included this function over here because it's not indented. Now indentation gets a little bit more complicated when you have other blocks of code. For example, if, elif, and else statements. So it's very important that you get used to looking at blocks of code like this. So for example, our function before was very simple. Now by adding these if conditions over here, we have made our function more complicated. Now here, as you can see, we have indented all this line of code by 4 square, which are represented by 4 dots over here. Now if we want to have another block of code inside this if statement, we have to indent the code over here with extra 4 space over here. So in this case, this print 1 over here is inside this if statement. So as you can see, it is indented by 8 spaces because first 4 space is for this function and the next 4 spaces is for if condition over here. Now here, this is the function block. So as you can see, it's including all indented codes over here. Then we have another blocks inside this function block over here. Now the first block is this is if block. So as you can see, this if block is indented inside this function. Then after this if condition, if you want to write any code, it has to be indented by 4 spaces after this if condition. So as you can see, if a is equal to 1, we are going to print out 1. That's why print statement is indented inside if condition, because it's going to be executed only this condition is met. Now the next code of block will be elif block. So here also you can see that this print2 statement is located inside this elif statement. So if a is equal to 2, in this case we are going to print 2. So print function has to be indented inside this elif block over here. Now you have to be able to see all of these while just looking at the indentation. Now if you want to present this, then it's almost like creating a new folder over here. So if I just create a new folder like this, so I'm going to name it if a is equal to 1, then I'm just going to take this folder and put it inside this my first function folder. You will see that this folder gets indented. Now if I create a new file over here by just copying this file, so I'm just going to put it print1. Then if I move this file inside this folder over here, you will see that this file gets indented inside this folder over here. So as you can see, it's representing the way that we have inside if condition. So this print1 is located inside this folder, so it is indented like this. So as you can see, this print1 file gets indented 8 spaces over here. Now this folder is indented 4 space, but this print statement, which is printing 1, is indented 8 space over here. So whenever we are putting if block which is located inside function, we have to indent this code block twice. So it's equivalent to 8 spaces in our code. Now every time when we are talking about indentation, we have been talking about spaces. And actually there is a two ways of creating indentation: spaces and tabs. You don't have to use just spaces. You can also use tabs that's created using tab key on your keyboard, which can look a little bit like this. So the question is, should we be using spaces or should we be using tabs? So there are lots of developers are arguing in coding communities regarding this. And in 2017, Stack Overflow developers survey shows salary differences between developers who use tabs and spaces. They ask the developer, do you use spaces or do you use tabs? And then they compare it against their annual salary. And somehow they have managed to show that people who use spaces seems to earn a lot more than people who use tabs. Now this is not official statistic. This survey comes from the Stack Overflow survey. Now official guide from the Python community is in fact to use spaces. Now if you click the link from the resource section of this lecture, it will take you the official guide from Python. Now here you can see the style guide for Python code. So here you can see that there is a section over here which says tabs or spaces. Now if I click on this, it will take me to the place where it says that spaces are preferred indentation method. And in fact, in Python 3, you cannot mix a code file that use tabs and spaces for indentation in the same file. And it also tells you that in order to indent a line of code, it should be indented by 4 spaces over here. Now using 4 spaces for a lot of people may seem quite inefficient because I have to hit my space bar 4 times in order to achieve a single indent. So how many indentations in our code, and this seems very inefficient. But luckily in most code editors they actually have a setting that allows you to indent using spaces by changing indent size to 4. So for example in Replit, if you go to the settings, you can see that there is an indentation type over here. So if I select space and put 4 over here, so whenever I click tab button, it's going to be indented 4 spaces over here. So as you can see, it is indented 4 spaces. So this means that you get to hit tab once and your code is in line with the guidance because behind the scenes your code editor inserting 4 spaces. So with this, we have come to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, we have explained how important indentation is in Python. So hopefully you have understood everything related to indentation.